The thunderous crack of a rifle shot echoed through the dusty main street of San Pedro, Texas, as Delilah Prescott ducked behind a rain barrel, clutching the bloodied letter that had brought her back to the town that despised her. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a wild mustang trying to break free, and she knew in that moment that returning had been a terrible mistake. San Pedro, 1875. The town sat nestled in the rolling hills of West Texas, a collection of wooden buildings and hard-faced people who had long memories and little forgiveness. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, casting sharp shadows across the dirt road as Delilah peered cautiously around the barrel. "You ain't welcome here, Delilah Prescott." The voice belonged to Frank Hollister, the shopkeeper whose son had died in the tragedy everyone blamed on her. 5 years gone ain't long enough, not by a damn sight. Delilah's fingers tightened around the crumpled paper. Her father's death notice had arrived 3 weeks ago at the small boarding house in Santa Fe where she'd been living under a different name, working as a seamstress. She hadn't wanted to return, but the letter mentioned her father's property and outstanding debts that required her attention. Now, as another bullet splintered the wood near her head, she regretted that decision with every fiber of her being. "I'm only here to settle my father's affairs," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll be gone before the week is out." "You'll be gone today if you know what's good for you," Frank snarled, reloading his rifle with practiced ease. Delilah knew she should run, should abandon the homestead and whatever meager inheritance might remain. But she had nowhere else to go, no money to start over again. Her father's property, however humble, represented her last chance. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her press herself tighter against the building. More trouble, no doubt. But instead of joining in the harassment, a deep voice called out, "That's enough, Hollister." Delilah risked a glance around the barrel. A tall man had positioned his horse between her and Frank's rifle. The stranger sat easy in his saddle, one hand resting casually on his holstered pistol, the other holding his horse's reins. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see he was young, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble. "This ain't your business, Deputy," Frank said, but he lowered his rifle slightly. "Public disturbance and attempted murder in broad daylight." "That's exactly my business." The man dismounted in one fluid motion. "Sheriff's out of town, which means I'm the law here until he returns." "You don't understand what she did," Frank insisted, gesturing wildly in Delilah's direction. "I understand that whatever happened is in the past, and we don't shoot unarmed women in the street." The deputy's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the calm. "Now go home, Frank, sleep it off." For a tense moment, Delilah thought the shopkeeper might refuse, might raise his rifle again. But after a few muttered curses, Frank turned and stalked away. The deputy waited until Frank was out of sight before approaching her. Up close, Delilah could see his eyes were a striking shade of green, intelligent and assessing. "You all right, madam?" he asked, offering his hand. Delilah hesitated before accepting his help to stand. "Thank you, Deputy Noah Patterson." He released her hand once she was steady. "And you must be Delilah Prescott," she stiffened. "I see my reputation precedes me. Hard not to in a town this size." He glanced down the street where other townsfolk had gathered to watch the commotion. Their faces were universally unwelcoming. "Come on, I'll escort you wherever you need to go." "I was heading to my father's house," she said, brushing dust from her simple blue dress. "He passed away recently. I know, I'm sorry for your loss." Noah's expression softened momentarily. "Old man Prescott kept to himself these past few years, but he was decent enough." Delilah swallowed hard. She hadn't seen her father since she'd fled San Pedro 5 years ago, hounded by accusations and grief. Their parting had been bitter, with him refusing to believe her side of the story. That he had died without reconciliation was a wound that would never properly heal. "My horse is at the livery," she said. "I arrived on the morning stage and hadn't even made it to the house yet." Noah nodded. "Let's get your horse then. I'll ride with you to the Prescott place. It's about 2 miles outside town if I recall correctly. You're new here." Delilah asked as they walked toward the livery stable. "Came to San Pedro about 3 years ago," he confirmed. Took the deputy position last year when Sheriff Larson's health started failing. That explained why he wasn't treating her like she carried the plague. Everyone who had been in San Pedro 5 years ago believed the worst of her. This man had no personal stake in the tragedy that had unfolded then. The livery owner grudgingly saddled her rented mare, refusing to meet her eyes. Noah watched the interaction with a frown but said nothing until they were mounted and heading out of town. Mind telling me what that was all about? He asked once the buildings of San Pedro were behind them. Delilah kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead. It's a long story. We've got a long ride, he countered. She sighed. Part of her wanted to remain silent to keep her pain private, but this man had just saved her life, and she owed him something for that. 5 years ago, there was a fire at the schoolhouse, she began, her voice barely audible over the clop of hooves. 3 children died, including Frank Hollister's son. Noah's expression remained neutral. And they blame you. I was the teacher. Delilah's throat tightened with the familiar ache of suppressed tears. I had stayed late that evening with a few students who needed extra help. The lamp in my office was knocked over during an altercation. What kind of altercation? Delilah's hands tightened on her reins. The banker's son, Thomas Whitley. He was 17, nearly a man. He'd been making advances for months. That night he cornered me after the other students had gone. Understanding darkened Noah's eyes. He attacked you, she nodded stiffly. I fought him off, but in the struggle the lamp was knocked over. The fire spread so quickly. I managed to get most of the children out, but her voice broke. 3 were trapped in a back room. I tried to reach them, but the roof collapsed. That wasn't your fault, Noah said firmly. Thomas Whitley told a different story, Delilah continued bitterly. He claimed I had been the one pursuing him, that I became enraged when he rejected me and deliberately set the fire in a jealous fit. His father owned half the businesses in town, including the newspaper. Everyone believed him. And no one stood up for you. No one questioned his story, Delilah laughed hollowly. The Whitleys had money and influence. I was just the schoolteacher, a woman living alone. There was a hearing, but it was a farce. The judge was in Whitley's pocket. I was cleared of legal wrongdoing due to insufficient evidence, but the town had made up its mind. Someone threw a brick through my window that night with a note telling me to leave, or they'd finish what the fire started. They rode in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the creaking of saddle leather and the rhythmic breathing of their horses. What did your father think? Noah finally asked, Delilah's chest constricted painfully. He chose to believe Whitley's version. Said no decent girl would have been alone with a boy like that I must have encouraged him somehow. Her voice wavered. He told me I had brought shame to the Prescott name. That's not right, Noah said, his jaw tight with anger. It doesn't matter now, she replied, though the old hurt still cut deep. I'm only here to settle his affairs and sell the property, then I'll be gone again. Where will you go? I don't know. Somewhere no one's heard of Delilah Prescott. The Prescott homestead came into view as they crested a small rise, a modest clapboard house with a sagging porch, a weathered barn, and a small corral. The place looked neglected, with tall grass growing around the buildings and a missing shutter on one window. Doesn't look like much, Delilah murmured, dismounting in front of the house. Your father wasn't well these past months, Noah explained, swinging down from his own horse. Couldn't keep up with the place. Delilah approached the door with trepidation. She hadn't set foot in this house since that terrible night when her father had turned his back on her. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the unlocked door. The interior was dim and musty, preserved exactly as she remembered it. Her father's pipe still sat in the ashtray beside his chair. A half-finished cup of coffee had dried on the table, leaving a dark ring. It was as if the old man had simply stepped out and might return at any moment. Noah remained respectfully by the door as Delilah moved through the main room, touching familiar objects with trembling fingers. She paused at a small shelf where a daguerreotype of her mother stood. Beside it, to her surprise, was a framed photograph of herself as a young woman, taken shortly before she had begun teaching at the school. He kept your picture, Noah observed quietly. Delilah nodded, unable to speak. Whatever her father had believed about her, he hadn't erased her completely from his life. That small comfort threatened to undo her careful composure. "I should go," Noah said after a moment. "Give you some privacy, but I don't think you should stay out here alone tonight." "I'll be fine," Delilah insisted. "I can handle myself." "I'm not questioning that, but Frank Hollister has a lot of friends and they've all been drinking since noon." Noah's expression was serious. "Why don't you gather whatever you need and come back to town? The jail has a spare room where you can stay safely until things settle down." Delilah bristled at the suggestion. "Sleep in a jail cell? No thank you, Deputy. It's not a cell. It's a proper room we keep for witnesses or folks passing through who need shelter." He held up his hands at her skeptical look. "Look, I'm not trying to confine you, I'm trying to protect you." "Why?" The question burst from her before she could stop it. "Why would you help me when everyone else in this town wants me gone or dead?" Noah considered her for a long moment. "Because I don't judge people based on rumors and hearsay, and because no one deserves to be treated the way Frank was treating you today." His sincerity was disarming. After 5 years of suspicion and hostility, encountering basic human decency felt almost foreign to Delilah. "I appreciate the offer," she said finally, "but I need to stay here. There are papers to go through, arrangements to make." She gestured around the cluttered house. "This is my responsibility." Noah looked like he wanted to argue, but instead nodded reluctantly. "All right. But I'll be checking on you regularly, and you take this." He removed a small revolver from inside his coat and offered it to her. Delilah hesitated only briefly before accepting the weapon. "Thank you. Keep it close," he advised. "And if there's any trouble, fire a shot in the air. I'll hear it from town if the wind's right." After Noah departed, Delilah sat heavily in her father's chair, the weight of memory and grief pressing down on her. The house felt both intimately familiar and utterly foreign. She had grown up here, had laughed and cried and dreamed within these walls. But now it was just a shell, echoing with ghosts of a life that no longer existed. As dusk approached, Delilah lit a lamp and began sorting through her father's personal effects. In his bedroom, she found a cedar chest containing her mother's quilts and a small leather pouch of jewelry, simple pieces that had been passed down through generations. These, at least, she would keep in the drawer of her father's nightstand. She discovered a bundle of letters tied with twine. Curious, she untied the bundle and was startled to see her own handwriting. These were the letters she had sent her father after leaving San Pedro, letters that had gone unanswered. She had assumed he had thrown them away unread. With trembling hands, Delilah opened the first one. It was dated 3 months after her departure, sent from a small town in New Mexico where she had briefly found work as a seamstress. "Dear Father," she read aloud to the empty room, "I hope this letter finds you well. I want you to know that I am safe, though I still carry the burden of what happened in San Pedro. Not a day passes that I don't think of those children. Their faces haunt my dreams, but I want you to know the truth, even if you choose not to believe it." Delilah continued reading through the letters, each one a plea for understanding, each one documenting another step in her journey away from San Pedro. The final letter, dated just 7 months ago, contained news of her settled life in Santa Fe and a tentative hope that perhaps time had softened her father's heart. At the bottom of the bundle, she found a single sheet of paper, not a letter, but what appeared to be the beginning of a response. Her father's shaky handwriting covered less than half the page before trailing off. "My dearest Delilah," it began. "I have received your letters these many years and read each one with a heavy heart. The pride that prevented me from responding is my greatest shame. I was wrong to doubt you, wrong to send you away when you most needed shelter. Thomas Whitley confessed the truth to Reverend Gardner on his deathbed last winter. The boy was consumed by guilt over the lives lost because of his actions. I wanted to write to you then to beg your forgiveness, but the words would not come." The letter ended there, unsigned and unsent. Delilah pressed it to her chest, tears flowing freely now. Her father had believed her in the end. He had wanted to reconcile. But death had taken him before he could complete that journey. A sudden noise from outside startled her from her grief. Delilah hurriedly wiped her eyes and reached for the revolver Noah had given her. Moving quietly to the window, she peered out into the gathering darkness. A lantern bobbed near the barn, not approaching the house. but moving around the outbuilding as if searching for something. Delilah's pulse quickened. Was it Frank Hollister or one of his friends, come to make good on their threats? Clutching the revolver, she slipped out the back door and circled around to get a better view. The figure with the lantern was inside the barn now. She could see light spilling through the cracks in the weathered boards. Taking a deep breath, Delilah steeled herself and approached silently. The barn door was partially open. Raising the revolver, she pushed it wider with her foot and leveled the gun at the intruder. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice stronger than she felt. The figure whirled around, lantern held high, illuminating a young face that was decidedly not Frank Hollister. "Who are you?" Delilah demanded, keeping the gun steady. "What are you doing in my father's barn?" The boy couldn't have been more than 18, with a shock of sandy hair and eyes wide with fright. "Please don't shoot, madam. I'm just checking on the livestock like Mr. Prescott asked me to." Delilah lowered the gun slightly. "My father asked you to care for his animals." The boy nodded vigorously. "Yes, madam, I'm Daniel Fletcher. I helped your pa around the place these last 2 years. He was paying me to feed his horse and milk the cow twice a day. You've been coming here since he died?" Delilah asked, finally lowering the revolver completely. "Yes, madam. He paid me through the end of the month, and I figured the animals still needed tending." Daniel gestured toward the stalls where an old plow horse and a brown and white cow watched them placidly. "I didn't know you'd be here tonight. Sheriff said you'd be coming, but I thought it'd be tomorrow." Delilah sighed, holstering the gun in the pocket of her skirt. "I'm sorry I frightened you, Daniel. I arrived earlier today." The boy's expression shifted from fear to curiosity. "You're Mr. Prescott's daughter, the one who used to be the teacher." Her defenses instantly rose again. "Yes. I suppose you've heard stories about me." To her surprise, Daniel shook his head. "Not much. Mr. Prescott didn't talk about you until near the end. Then he mentioned you a lot. Said he had done you wrong and hoped to make it right someday." A fresh wave of grief washed over Delilah. "Well, it's too late for that now," she said softly. Daniel ducked his head awkwardly. "I'm sorry about your pa, madam. He was good to me." "Thank you for looking after his animals," Delilah said. "I'll need to decide what to do with them. I can't take them with me when I leave." "Where are you going?" Daniel asked, then immediately blushed. "Sorry, that's not my business." "It's all right," Delilah replied. "I'm not entirely sure yet. I need to sell this property first." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. Patterson might know someone looking to buy. He's been helping a lot of folks find land lately." "Mr. Patterson? You mean Deputy Patterson?" "Yes, madam. He's been trying to bring more settlers to the area. Says San Pedro needs new blood." Delilah pondered this information. Noah Patterson was turning out to be more than just a lawman. He seemed genuinely invested in the town's future. Perhaps he could indeed help her sell the property quickly. "I'll speak with him," she decided. "In the meantime, would you be willing to continue caring for the animals until arrangements can be made? I'll pay you, of course." Daniel brightened. "Yes, madam, happy to help." After the boy departed, Delilah secured the house for the night, placing a chair against the door handle for good measure. Despite the revolver under her pillow, sleep came fitfully, haunted by memories of fire and accusations. She woke to a gentle knocking at the front door. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, indicating she had slept later than intended. Grabbing the revolver, she approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" she called. "Noah Patterson," came the reply. "Just checking on you as promised." Delilah removed the chair and opened the door to find the deputy standing on her porch, hat in hand. In the morning light, she noticed details she had missed yesterday: the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the clean, angular lines of his face. "Good morning," she said, suddenly aware of her rumpled appearance and hastily pinned hair. "I'm fine, as you can see." "Glad to hear it." Noah's gaze moved past her to the interior of the house. "Any trouble during the night?" "Only a visit from Daniel Fletcher, who apparently tends my father's livestock," she replied, stepping back to allow him entry. "He mentioned you might be able to help me sell this property." Noah nodded, setting his hat on a side table. "I know a few folks who might be interested. Land with water access is valuable around here." "We have water access?" Delilah asked in surprise. "There's a creek running through the back section of your property." Your father dug an irrigation channel from it a few years back, quadrupled what this land is worth. This was unexpected news. Delilah had assumed the property would fetch only a modest sum, perhaps enough to start somewhere new. If it was truly valuable, she might have more options than she'd thought. How quickly could it sell? She asked. Noah studied her for a moment. You're that eager to leave San Pedro behind. Wouldn't you be in my position? He conceded the point with a tilt of his head. Fair enough. To answer your question, it depends on the price you're asking and how selective you want to be about the buyer. This is good land. It deserves someone who'll work it properly. I hadn't considered that, Delilah admitted. I just want a fair price. I can help you with that, Noah offered. But it might take a little time to find the right buyer. Delilah hesitated. Each day she remained in San Pedro increased the risk of further confrontations. Yet rushing to sell might mean accepting less than the property was worth. How long are we talking about? She finally asked. A week, maybe two, Noah estimated. I know some folks over in Abilene who were asking about land. I can send a telegram today. 2 weeks in a town that hated her. It seemed an eternity, but what choice did she have? All right, she agreed reluctantly. 2 weeks. But I'll need supplies in the meantime. She gestured to the nearly empty kitchen. My father's cupboards are bare. I'll escort you into town, Noah said immediately. After what happened yesterday, it's not safe for you to go alone. The ride into San Pedro was tense. People stopped to stare as Delilah and Noah passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Noah kept his horse close to hers, his presence both reassuring and unsettling. She wasn't used to having an ally anymore. At the general store, the proprietor, Mrs. Gunderson, greeted Noah warmly but barely acknowledged Delilah. What can I get for you, deputy? The older woman asked, pointedly ignoring Delilah. Miss Prescott needs supplies, Noah replied firmly, and I expect her to receive the same courteous service you'd give any customer. Mrs. Gunderson's lips thinned, but she nodded stiffly and turned to Delilah. What do you need? Delilah listed the basic necessities: flour, coffee, beans, salt pork, keeping her voice steady despite the woman's clear disdain. As Mrs. Gunderson gathered the items, the bell above the door jingled, announcing a new customer. Well, look who's back in town, a cold voice drawled. Delilah didn't need to turn to recognize Thomas Whitley, S.R., the banker whose son had attacked her and then lied about it. Her body tensed, fight or flight instincts warring within her. Mr. Whitley, Noah acknowledged, stepping slightly in front of Delilah. Something I can help you with today. The banker was a heavy-set man with thinning hair and the florid complexion of someone who enjoyed his whiskey too frequently. His expensive suit and gold watch fob marked him as one of the wealthiest men in town. Just surprised to see certain people showing their faces in public, Whitley replied, his gaze fixed on Delilah with undisguised malice. Some folks don't know when they're not welcome. Miss Prescott has every right to be here, Noah stated calmly. She's settling her father's estate. Whitley's mouth curled in contempt. That's so. Well, she'd best do it quickly. San Pedro has a long memory for those who bring disaster to our town. Delilah had endured 5 years of silence and exile. She had swallowed her rage and grief, had rebuilt a semblance of a life from the ashes of her reputation. But standing here, facing the man who had chosen to believe his son's lies over the truth, something inside her finally snapped. Your son confessed, she said, her voice low but steady. Before he died, he told Reverend Gardner the truth about what happened that night. Whitley's face darkened. How dare you speak of my boy? He's dead because of you. He's dead because the guilt was eating him alive, Delilah countered, stepping forward despite Noah's warning hand on her arm. He attacked me, Mr. Whitley. When I fought back, he knocked over the lamp. Those children died because of his actions, not mine, and you protected him. You spread lies about me. The store had gone completely silent. Mrs. Gunderson stood frozen behind the counter, a can of peaches clutched in her hand. In the corner, an elderly man had stopped mid-browse to stare. That's enough, Whitley sputtered, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. I won't stand here and listen to this slander. Is it slander if it's true? Noah asked quietly. I heard about your son's confession, Mr. Whitley. Seems it's common knowledge among the church elders. Whitley looked from Noah to Delilah, his complexion growing even redder. For a moment, Delilah thought he might actually strike her. Instead, he pointed a trembling finger at her face. You destroyed my family, he hissed. My wife never recovered from losing our boy. She died of grief not 6 months later. I'm sorry for your loss, Delilah said, and despite everything, she meant it. But I won't accept blame for something I didn't do. Not anymore. Whitley turned on his heel and stormed out of the store, the door slamming behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. In the awkward silence that followed, Delilah became acutely aware of the other customers watching her. But their expressions had changed. The open hostility had been replaced by uncertainty, by the dawning realization that perhaps the story they had believed for 5 years wasn't the whole truth. Mrs. Gunderson cleared her throat. Your supplies are ready, Miss Prescott, she said, her tone noticeably less frosty. That'll be $3.45. As they left the store, packages secured in their saddlebags, Noah gave Delilah an appraising look. That took courage, he said, standing up to Whitley like that. It shouldn't have had to, she replied, her hands still shaking slightly as she mounted her horse. The truth should have been enough 5 years ago. Sometimes the truth needs time to surface, Noah observed. And sometimes it needs someone brave enough to speak it aloud, no matter the consequences. His words lingered in Delilah's mind as they rode back to the homestead. For 5 years, she had been running from her past, hiding from the whispers and accusations. Perhaps it was time to stop running and start fighting not just for her reputation, but for justice. The next few days fell into a strange routine. Delilah spent her mornings sorting through her father's belongings, afternoons working in the small garden behind the house, and evenings reading through old family papers. Noah visited daily, sometimes bringing news of potential buyers, other times simply checking on her welfare. She found herself looking forward to these visits more than she cared to admit. There was something steadfast about Noah Patterson, a quiet strength that made her feel secure for the first time in years. He never pushed her to talk about the past, but listened attentively when she chose to share fragments of her life before and after the fire. On the 5th day after her return to San Pedro, Noah arrived with unexpected news. The Reverend Gardner would like to see you, he announced as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Delilah tensed. Why? He didn't say specifically, Noah replied. But I think it has to do with Thomas Whitley Jr.'s confession. After what happened at the store, there's been a lot of talk in town. I've spent 5 years being judged and condemned by these people, Delilah said bitterly. Why should I care what they think now? Noah considered her for a moment. Maybe you shouldn't. But wouldn't it be something if the truth finally came out? If people knew what really happened that night? It won't bring those children back, she whispered. No, he agreed softly. Nothing can do that, but it might help you stop running. Delilah stared out at the darkening landscape, conflicted. Part of her wanted to pack her bags and leave immediately, to continue the nomadic existence she'd grown accustomed to. But another part, a part she had thought long dead, yearned for vindication, for the chance to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. When does the Reverend want to see me? She finally asked. Tomorrow morning, Noah said. I can accompany you if you'd like. Delilah nodded, grateful for his offer. I'd appreciate that. The following morning dawned clear and mild, a perfect spring day that belied the turmoil in Delilah's heart as she dressed for the meeting with Reverend Gardner. She chose her best dress, a modest navy blue with white collar and cuffs, and pinned her hair in a simple but neat style. If she was to face her past, she would do so with dignity. Noah arrived precisely at 9, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt beneath his worn leather vest. The badge pinned to his chest caught the sunlight as he helped her mount her horse. You look nice, he commented, his green eyes warm with approval. Thank you, Delilah replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks despite herself. I wanted to look respectable. You always do, he said simply, and something in his tone made her heart flutter unexpectedly. The Church of San Pedro was a whitewashed wooden structure with a small steeple, situated at the edge of town. As they approached, Delilah was relieved to see no gathered crowd, no waiting accusers. Only Reverend Gardner stood on the steps, a tall, thin man with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. "Miss Prescott," he greeted her, extending his hand as Noah helped her dismount. "Thank you for coming. Deputy Patterson, good morning." Noah nodded respectfully. "Reverend." "Please come inside," Gardner said, leading them into the cool, dimly lit interior of the church. Rather than proceeding to the altar, he guided them to a small office off the main sanctuary. Inside, to Delilah's surprise, sat Mrs. Hollister, Frank's wife and the mother of one of the children who had died in the fire. The woman's face was lined with grief, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as they entered, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Hollister," Delilah breathed, her heart constricting painfully. "I didn't expect." "Please sit down, Miss Prescott." Reverend Gardner indicated a chair across from Mrs. Hollister. "Martha has something she wishes to say to you." Delilah sank into the offered chair, acutely aware of Noah standing supportively behind her. Mrs. Hollister's gaze never left her face. "My husband shot at you," the woman said without preamble. "Frank told me what he did. He was drunk and angry, but that's no excuse." "I understand his anger," Delilah said softly. "Losing a child." She trailed off, unable to find adequate words. Mrs. Hollister nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "My Billy was 8 years old. He loved school. He loved you as his teacher." She took a shuddering breath. "For 5 years I've blamed you for his death. I believed Thomas Whitley's story because it gave me someone to hate, someone to hold responsible." Delilah remained silent, her own eyes burning with unshed tears. "Reverend Gardner told me about Thomas's confession last year," Mrs. Hollister continued. "I didn't want to believe it at first. It was easier to keep hating you than to accept that my boy died because of that young man's actions." "I tried to reach them," Delilah whispered, the words torn from some deep, wounded place inside her. "I tried so hard to get to them before the roof collapsed." "I know," Mrs. Hollister said, surprising her. "Janie Wilcox told me. She was one of the children you got out. She said you went back in 3 times, even when the smoke was so thick she couldn't see. She said you were calling their names, trying to find them." A tear slipped down Delilah's cheek. "It wasn't enough." "No," Mrs. Hollister agreed, her own tears falling freely now. "But you tried. And all these years, we've punished you for a tragedy you tried to prevent." She reached across the space between them, hesitantly offering her hand. "I can't speak for the whole town, Miss Prescott, but I'm asking for your forgiveness for the way I've treated you." Delilah stared at the outstretched hand, momentarily unable to comprehend what was happening. Then, with a small sob, she clasped Mrs. Hollister's fingers in her own. "There's nothing to forgive," she managed. "You were a mother who lost her child." The two women held hands across the divide of grief and misunderstanding, united for a moment in mutual compassion. Reverend Gardner watched with quiet approval, while Noah placed a gentle hand on Delilah's shoulder. When they finally parted, Mrs. Hollister wiped her eyes and stood. "I should go," she said. "Frank doesn't know I'm here. He's not ready to let go of his anger, but I had to tell you that I don't blame you anymore, Miss Prescott." After Mrs. Hollister left, Reverend Gardner turned to Delilah with a somber expression. "What happened to you was a grave injustice, my dear. The town was quick to judge and slow to question. I bear some responsibility for that as well." "You believed Thomas's confession," Delilah pointed out. "You've tried to set things right." "Too late, I fear," the Reverend sighed. "But perhaps not too late for you to find some peace. I've written a letter stating the truth of what happened, based on Thomas Whitley's deathbed confession. I've read it to the church council, and I plan to read it to the congregation this Sunday." Delilah felt lightheaded. After 5 years of living under a cloud of suspicion and shame, the prospect of public vindication seemed almost unreal. "Why now?" she asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "Why not when he first confessed?" Reverend Gardner looked ashamed. "Fear, Miss Prescott, Thomas Whitley Sr. is a powerful man in this town, and I was a coward. It took your return to make me see that silence in the face of injustice is its own sin." Noah, who had remained quiet throughout the exchange, finally spoke. Will you attend the service on Sunday, Delilah? It might help people accept the truth if they see you there. Delilah hadn't set foot in the San Pedro church since before the fire. The thought of facing the entire town, of standing before their judgment once more, made her stomach clench with anxiety. Yet there was also a growing sense that this might be her chance to finally close this chapter of her life, not by running away, but by reclaiming her truth. "I'll be there," she decided, her voice growing stronger with resolve. It's time this story was told properly. The days leading up to Sunday were filled with a nervous energy that had Delilah alternating between determined preparation and moments of panic when she considered changing her mind and fleeing town. Noah visited daily, bringing news from town and updates on potential buyers for the property. His steady presence became an anchor for her fluctuating emotions. On Saturday afternoon, he arrived with an unexpected visitor, Daniel Fletcher, the young man who had been caring for her father's livestock. "Daniel has something he thinks you should see," Noah explained as they dismounted in front of the house. The boy shuffled nervously, clutching what appeared to be a small leather-bound book. "It's your pa's journal, madam," he said, holding it out to Delilah. "He used to write in it most evenings. I found it in the barn this morning when I was cleaning out the tack room." Delilah accepted the journal with trembling hands. "Thank you, Daniel. This means a great deal to me." After the boy departed, Delilah sat on the porch with Noah, turning the small book over in her hands. "Aren't you going to read it?" Noah asked gently. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "What if he wrote terrible things about me? What if he died still believing I was guilty?" Noah's hand covered hers, warm and reassuring. "From what I knew of your father, he was a man who valued truth. And we already know he learned the truth before he died." Taking a deep breath, Delilah opened the journal to the last few entries. Her father's handwriting had grown shakier in his final days, but the words were still legible. "April 3, 1875, she read aloud. "Reverend Gardner visited today. He told me something that has shaken me to my core. Thomas Whitley Jr. confessed on his deathbed that he attacked my Delilah and caused the fire that killed those children. All these years, I believed the worst of my own daughter. I turned her away when she needed me most. How can I ever make amends for such a betrayal?" Tears blurred her vision, but Delilah continued reading the next entry. "April 10, 1875. I have written a letter to Delilah at the address in Santa Fe that was on her last correspondence. I pray it reaches her. I have told her everything, my shame, my regret, my desperate wish to see her again before I die. Will she forgive an old fool who couldn't see past his own pride to believe in his daughter's innocence?" The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before her father's death. April 24, 1875. No word from Delilah. Perhaps my letter went astray. Perhaps she has moved on again, always running from the injustice I helped perpetuate, or perhaps she received it and cannot find it in her heart to forgive me. I would not blame her. I have amended my will, leaving everything to her. It is a poor substitute for the faith I should have shown her 5 years ago, but it is all I have left to give. My Delilah, if somehow you ever read these words, know that your father died loving you and believing in your innocence. The only ghost that haunts me is the memory of your face when I turned you away." The journal slipped from Delilah's fingers as sobs overtook her. Noah's arm went around her shoulders, drawing her against his chest as years of pent-up grief and pain poured out of her. "He believed me," she wept. "He tried to find me before he died." "Yes," Noah murmured against her hair. "He did." When her tears finally subsided, Delilah remained within the circle of Noah's arms, drawing comfort from his steady heartbeat beneath her ear. She should pull away, she knew. It wasn't proper to be so familiar with a man she barely knew. But in that moment, propriety seemed less important than the healing touch of human connection after so long alone. "I never received his letter," she said finally, sitting up and wiping her eyes. "I moved from my boarding house in Santa Fe just a month before his death notice found me. His letter must have arrived after I'd gone." "Life has a cruel way of timing things," Noah observed, his arm still resting lightly around her shoulders. "But at least now you know how he felt." "That has to count for something," Delilah nodded, looking down at the journal. "It means everything." Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. Delilah dressed with care in a simple but elegant green dress that had been her mother's, preserved in the cedar chest all these years. As she pinned her hair, she studied her reflection in the small mirror above her father's bureau. 5 years of hardship had left their mark. There were fine lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there before, and a gravity to her expression that spoke of lessons learned through suffering. But there was also a strength there that was new, a resilience forged in fire. Noah arrived to escort her to church, looking distinctly uncomfortable in a formal black coat and string tie. His customary ease seemed constrained by the unaccustomed finery. "You clean up well, Deputy Patterson," Delilah remarked, trying for lightness despite her nerves. He tugged at his collar self-consciously. "Feel like I'm being strangled, but Mrs. Gunderson insisted this was proper church attire." The mention of the shopkeeper reminded Delilah of their confrontation with Thomas Whitley. "Has there been much talk in town about Sunday's sermon?" Noah nodded grimly. "Word has spread. Reverend Gardner hasn't been subtle about his intentions. Most folks are curious, at least. Some are angry, particularly Whitley and his associates." "Will there be trouble?" she asked, suddenly concerned. "Not in church," Noah assured her. "Even Whitley won't disrupt a service afterward. Well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." The church was already filling when they arrived, the townsfolk dressed in their Sunday best and buzzing with anticipation. Conversations stuttered to a halt as Delilah entered on Noah's arm, dozens of pairs of eyes turning to stare at her. She lifted her chin and met their gazes steadily, refusing to show the anxiety churning inside her. Noah led her to a pew near the front, positioning himself between her and the main aisle as if to shield her from potential confrontation. Mrs. Hollister sat across the aisle with Frank, who pointedly looked away when Delilah glanced in their direction. As the last congregants settled into their seats, Reverend Gardner ascended to the pulpit. His sermon began conventionally enough, with readings from Scripture and reflections on forgiveness and judgment. But as he reached the midpoint of his address, he set aside his Bible and took out a separate sheet of paper. "Today," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed sanctuary, "I must speak to you about a grave injustice that has been perpetuated in our community for 5 years. An injustice in which I, to my shame, was complicit through my silence." A murmur ran through the congregation. Thomas Whitley, SR, seated near the back, shifted uncomfortably. 5 years ago," the Reverend continued, "a terrible fire claimed the lives of 3 of our children, William Hollister, Emma Tate, and Samuel Green. In our grief and anger, we sought someone to blame. We accepted without question the account given by Thomas Whitley, Jr., which placed the blame squarely on our schoolteacher, Miss Delilah Prescott." All eyes turned to Delilah. She felt Noah's hand cover hers reassuringly. "Last year, as Thomas Whitley, Jr. lay dying of consumption, he asked to speak with me privately. What he revealed was a confession that has haunted me ever since." Reverend Gardner raised the paper he held. "I have here Thomas's signed statement, witnessed by myself and Dr. Morgan, detailing what truly happened that night." The Reverend proceeded to read Thomas's confession, aloud, how he had developed an inappropriate fixation on Delilah, how he had cornered her in her office after the other students left, how he had attempted to force himself upon her, and how in the ensuing struggle the lamp had been knocked over, igniting the fire. Thomas admitted to fleeing the building, leaving Delilah to try to save the children alone. And finally, he confessed to lying afterward, shifting the blame to her to save himself from the consequences of his actions. As the Reverend read, the church remained absolutely silent except for a few gasps and one muffled sob from Mrs. Tate, whose daughter had been among the victims. When he finished, Reverend Gardner looked out over his congregation with sorrowful dignity. "We have sinned against Miss Prescott," he declared. "We condemned her without fair hearing. We drove her from her home and her livelihood. We tarnished her good name with false accusations. And even when the truth came to light, many of us, myself included, lacked the courage to speak out and correct this terrible wrong." From his seat at the back, Thomas Whitley, SR, rose abruptly. "This is absurd," he declared, his face mottled with anger. My son was not in his right mind when he made these claims. He was delirious from fever. He was lucid, Thomas. Dr. Morgan spoke up from several rows ahead. I examined him immediately before and after his confession. He knew exactly what he was saying and why. Whitley pointed an accusing finger at Delilah. This woman corrupted my son. She turned him against his own family with her feminine wiles. Sit down, Mr. Whitley, Noah said, rising to his feet. His voice wasn't particularly loud, but it carried an authority that silenced the banker instantly. Your son's statement is clear. Miss Prescott was the victim, not the instigator. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the congregation. Delilah looked around in wonder as faces that had regarded her with suspicion and hostility for years now showed uncertainty, shame, and dawning belief in her innocence. Miss Prescott, Reverend Gardner said gently, would you care to address the congregation? Delilah hadn't expected this. She had come prepared to listen, perhaps to accept apologies privately, but not to speak. Yet looking at the sea of faces before her, she realized that this moment wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about reclaiming her voice, which had been silenced for too long. Slowly, she stood. Noah squeezed her hand once before letting go, a silent gesture of support that gave her courage. For 5 years, she began, her voice soft but steady, I have carried the weight of that terrible night. Not the weight of guilt, for I have always known the truth of what happened, but the weight of grief. Grief for 3 innocent children whose lives were cut short. Grief for a community that turned its back on me when I needed it most. Grief for my father, who died before we could reconcile. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The church remained utterly silent, every face turned toward her. I do not stand before you seeking revenge or even justice. That time has passed. What I seek now is simply peace for myself, for the families who lost their precious children, and for this town that has been divided by lies for too long. Delilah looked directly at Mrs. Tate and Mrs. Green, the mothers of the other children who had died. I am so deeply sorry for your loss. Not a day goes by that I don't think of Emma and Samuel, of the bright futures they should have had. I tried to save them. I would have given my life to save them. That I failed is a sorrow I will carry always. Mrs. Green dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Mrs. Tate gave a small, jerky nod of acknowledgement. As for the rest of you, Delilah continued, her gaze sweeping the congregation, I do not ask for your pity or even your apologies. I ask only that you examine your hearts and consider how quickly judgment can become cruelty, and how easily the truth can be buried beneath convenient lies. Her eyes finally came to rest on Thomas Whitley, S.R., who stood rigid with anger at the back of the church. Mr. Whitley, I am truly sorry for the loss of your son. Whatever his mistakes, he found the courage in the end to speak the truth. There is nobility in that which deserves respect. With those words, Delilah sat down, feeling strangely light, as if a burden she had carried for years had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Noah's hand found hers again, and this time she laced her fingers through his without hesitation. The rest of the service passed in a blur. When it ended, Delilah found herself surrounded by townsfolk, some offering tentative apologies, others simply wanting to speak with her, to reconnect with the woman they had once known and respected. Mrs. Tate embraced her tearfully, whispering, Emma always said you were the best teacher. She would want me to tell you that. Throughout it all, Noah remained at her side, a steady presence as she navigated this unexpected reconciliation. Thomas Whitley, S.R., had stormed out immediately after the service, but many others lingered, forming a protective circle around Delilah that would have been unthinkable just days before. As they finally made their way outside, Noah helped Delilah into his buggy rather than having her mount her horse. Thought you might be tired after all that, he explained, settling in beside her. I am, she admitted, suddenly aware of the emotional exhaustion that had followed her public vindication. But it's a good kind of tired, like after completing a difficult but necessary task. Noah clicked to the horse, guiding the buggy away from the church and down the main street. But instead of turning toward the road that led to the Prescott homestead, he continued straight, heading west out of town. This isn't the way home, Delilah observed. I thought you might like to see something first, Noah replied with a small smile. Something that might influence your decision about selling the property. Curious, Delilah didn't object as they traveled several miles beyond San Pedro's outskirts. Finally, Noah turned the buggy onto a narrow track that wound through a stand of cottonwood trees. As they emerged from the trees, Delilah gasped at the view before them. A wide, fertile valley stretched below, bisected by a sparkling creek. Wildflowers dotted the grassland in patches of yellow and purple, and in the distance, a small herd of deer grazed peacefully. "This is part of your father's land," Noah said, stopping the buggy at the crest of the gentle slope. "The western boundary. Most folks in town don't even know this section exists. Your father kept it private." "It's beautiful," Delilah whispered, taking in the pastoral scene. "I had no idea." "The railroad's coming through 30 miles south of here next year," Noah continued. "When it does, land like this will be worth 10 times what it is now. Your father knew that. He bought up this section about 3 years ago, anticipating the growth it would bring to the region." Delilah turned to him in surprise. "You're saying my father's property is even more valuable than you initially thought?" Noah nodded. "If you sell now, you'll get a fair price, but if you wait a year or two, you could build a small fortune, enough to go anywhere, do anything you wanted." "Why are you telling me this?" Delilah asked, studying his face. "Wouldn't it be easier to let me sell quickly and leave, given all the trouble my presence has caused?" A shadow crossed Noah's features. "Is that what you think I want? For you to leave?" The intensity in his green eyes made Delilah's breath catch. "I don't know what you want, Deputy Patterson." "Noah," he corrected softly. "And I want you to make the decision that's right for you with all the facts at your disposal. If that means waiting to sell, then so be it." They sat in silence for a long moment, the only sounds the gentle breeze rustling through the grass and the occasional whicker from the horse. "What would you do?" Delilah finally asked. "If you were in my position," Noah considered the question seriously. "I'd probably wait," he admitted. "But my situation is different. I have roots here, a position in the community. You have every reason to want to leave San Pedro behind." "Do I?" Delilah mused, gazing out over the valley. "This morning, perhaps, but now." She hesitated, trying to articulate the change she felt. "Now I wonder if running away is the right answer. If there might be value in staying, in rebuilding what was broken." Noah's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, a hope he seemed afraid to voice. "It won't be easy," he cautioned. "Some people will never accept the truth, no matter what evidence they're presented with, Whitley for one." "I'm not afraid of Thomas Whitley," Delilah said with newfound confidence. "Not anymore." They remained in the valley until the afternoon sun began its westward descent, talking easily about the land, about San Pedro's future with the coming railroad, about Noah's hopes for the town's growth and prosperity. For the first time in years, Delilah allowed herself to think beyond mere survival, to contemplate a future that included more than just escape. As they drove back toward town, Delilah made a decision. "I'd like to see more of the property tomorrow," she said. "All of it. If I'm going to consider staying, even temporarily, I should know exactly what I have." Noah's smile was like sunrise breaking across his face. "I'd be happy to show you," he said, and the warmth in his voice wrapped around her like a promise. The following days brought a dramatic shift in Delilah's relationship with San Pedro. While not everyone embraced her wholeheartedly, many townsfolk made gestures of reconciliation. Mrs. Gunderson sent over a basket of fresh baked goods with a note of apology. The Green and Tate families invited her to visit, to share memories of their children as they had been in her classroom. Even Frank Hollister, after much persuasion from his wife, grudgingly acknowledged that he had been wrong to shoot at her. Noah became a daily fixture at the Prescott homestead, arriving each morning to show Delilah another section of her property or to help with repairs to the house and barn. Daniel Fletcher continued to care for the livestock, now joined by his younger sister, who took a shine to the cow's new calf. 2 weeks stretched into a month, and Delilah found herself thinking less and less about leaving. The property revealed new treasures daily, a hidden grove of fruit trees her father had planted, a natural spring that fed into the creek, fertile bottomland perfect for crops. With Noah's guidance, she began to see the potential for building something meaningful from her inheritance. More surprising than her growing attachment to the land was her deepening connection with Noah himself. Their friendship blossomed naturally, built on mutual respect and shared moments of both work and leisure. She learned that he had come west after the war, seeking purpose after the loss of his family's farm in Tennessee. He had worked as a cowhand, a freight driver, and briefly as a Pinkerton agent before settling in San Pedro, drawn by the promise of a community he could help shape. In turn, Delilah shared stories of her nomadic existence after leaving San Pedro, the string of temporary positions, the constant fear of discovery, the loneliness of living without roots or connections. Noah listened without judgment, his steady presence a balm to wounds that had never fully healed. One evening in early June, they sat on the porch after a long day of clearing brush along the creek. The sunset painted the sky in vivid oranges and purples, a spectacular display that left them both in appreciative silence. "I never thought I'd see a San Pedro sunset again," Delilah mused, sipping from a cup of coffee. "Never thought I'd want to." "And now?" Noah asked, his voice carefully casual. Delilah turned to study his profile, strong and clean against the darkening sky. "Now I'm not so sure I want to leave." His head turned, green eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I'm glad to hear that," he said softly. "Are you?" she challenged gently. "Why?" Noah set his coffee cup aside and shifted to face her fully. "Because I think you belong here, Delilah. Not because of your father's land or your history with the town, but because of who you are now, a woman of remarkable strength and compassion who has every right to reclaim her place in this community." "Is that the only reason?" she pressed, surprising herself with her boldness. A slow smile spread across Noah's face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "No," he admitted, "it's not the only reason." He reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers where it rested on the porch rail. "I've come to care for you, Delilah. More than I should, perhaps, given my position and the circumstances of your return, but I can't deny what I feel." Delilah's heart hammered in her chest. She had sensed the growing attraction between them, but had been afraid to acknowledge it, afraid of what it might mean for her carefully guarded independence. "I've spent 5 years keeping people at a distance," she confessed, "never staying in one place long enough to form attachments. Never allowing myself to be vulnerable again." "I know," Noah said gently, "and I understand if you're not ready for whatever this might be between us. I just wanted you to know where I stand before you make any decisions about your future." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within Delilah, a part of her heart she had thought permanently closed. Without overthinking, she turned her hand beneath his, lacing their fingers together. "I've come to care for you too, Noah," she said quietly. "And that terrifies me almost as much as it exhilarates me." His fingers tightened around hers. "We could take it slow," he suggested. "See where it leads." Delilah nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'd like that." The following Sunday, Delilah attended church again, this time seated beside Noah not just as someone under his protection, but as a woman openly exploring a courtship with the town's deputy. The change in their relationship did not go unnoticed by the congregation, but the whispers now were more curious than malicious. After the service, Reverend Gardner approached them with a warm smile. "Miss Prescott, it does my heart good to see you settling back into our community," he said. "And Deputy Patterson, I've never seen you look quite so content." Noah's ears reddened slightly, but he didn't deny the observation. "Miss Prescott has decided to stay in San Pedro, at least for the time being," he explained. "She's considering what to do with her father's property." "A wise decision," the Reverend nodded. "That land has potential, and so does this town, despite its flaws. We're still learning to be better than our prejudices." As summer progressed, Delilah found herself increasingly drawn to the idea of permanently remaining in San Pedro. With Noah's help, she began making improvements to the homestead, repairing the roof, painting the exterior, planting a larger vegetable garden. The physical work was satisfying, a tangible way of reclaiming her connection to the place that had once been home. Their courtship proceeded with a comfortable mixture of traditional propriety and frontier practicality. Noah took her on proper outings, picnics by the creek, dinners at the hotel restaurant, a trip to the county fair in nearby Abilene. But he also taught her to shoot his spare revolver, helped her negotiate fair prices with local traders, and respected her independence even as their feelings for each other deepened. In late July, Thomas Whitley, Sr., made one final attempt to undermine Delilah's growing acceptance in the community. He called a town meeting, ostensibly to discuss the coming railroad, but actually to raise concerns about having a woman of questionable character owning significant property near San Pedro. Delilah, now confident in her standing, attended the meeting with Noah at her side. When Whitley began his thinly veiled attack, she rose calmly to address the gathered townsfolk. "Mr. Whitley seems concerned about my plans for my father's land," she said evenly. "Allow me to put those concerns to rest. I intend to establish a proper school on a portion of the property, a school open to all children of San Pedro and the surrounding area, regardless of their parents' means or position." A murmur of interest ran through the crowd. The town's current school was a single room attached to the church, overcrowded and poorly equipped. "Furthermore," Delilah continued, "I plan to set aside acreage for a community garden where families can grow fresh produce. And when the railroad comes, I'll donate land for a proper station, which will benefit all our businesses." The assembled citizens broke into spontaneous applause. Whitley, seeing his strategy backfiring spectacularly, stormed from the meeting hall. It was the last time he publicly opposed Delilah. Within a month, he had sold his banking interests and moved to Austin. His influence in San Pedro finished. As summer turned to fall, Delilah's vision for her property began to take shape. With financial advice from Noah and practical help from many townsfolk who now supported her plans, she commissioned the building of a schoolhouse on a gentle rise overlooking the creek. The structure was simple but spacious, with large windows to admit plenty of light and separate classrooms for different age groups. Noah watched with pride as Delilah threw herself into this new purpose, her natural gifts as an educator finding expression once more. He had fallen deeply in love with her, not just with her beauty or her resilience, but with her capacity for forgiveness, her willingness to create rather than destroy, to build a future instead of dwelling in the past. On a crisp October evening, as they walked along the creek after inspecting the nearly completed schoolhouse, Noah gathered his courage for the question he had been wanting to ask for weeks. "The school will be ready by Christmas," he observed, helping Delilah over a fallen log. "Yes," she agreed, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Just in time for the winter term. I've already had inquiries from 15 families with school-age children. You'll need help running it," Noah said casually. "A school that size is too much for one teacher," Delilah nodded. "I've written to a former colleague in Santa Fe who might be interested in the second teaching position. And Daniel's sister has offered to help with the younger children." Noah stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "What about a husband?" he asked, his voice suddenly husky. "Would that be of any help?" Delilah's breath caught as she realized what he was asking. "Noah, I love you, Delilah," he said simply. "I've loved you since that first day when you stood up to Frank Hollister with more courage than anyone I'd ever met. I've loved watching you reclaim your life and your purpose here, and I want nothing more than to build a future with you here, on this land that can be our legacy together." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "When I came back to San Pedro, I thought I had no future here," she whispered. "You showed me I was wrong. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." "Is that a yes?" Noah asked, his green eyes searching hers hopefully. In answer, Delilah rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his in their first kiss, sweet and tender, a promise sealed in the golden light of autumn. "Yes," she murmured against his mouth. "Yes, I will marry you, Noah Patterson." Their wedding took place on Christmas Eve in the newly completed schoolhouse, with Reverend Gardner officiating and most of the town in attendance. The building was festooned with pine boughs and holly, lanterns casting a warm glow over the assembled guests. Mrs. Hollister had helped Delilah, so her wedding dress a simple but elegant creation of ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. As Delilah walked down the aisle toward Noah, who waited beside the reverend with undisguised joy on his face, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. The town that had once shunned her now celebrated her marriage. The land that had been her father's legacy had become the foundation of her future. And the man who had first seen her as a citizen to protect now looked at her with a love that took her breath away. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Gardner began, his voice carrying to the farthest corners of the schoolhouse, "we are gathered here today not only to witness the union of Noah Patterson and Delilah Prescott, but also to celebrate a remarkable story of redemption and renewal." As Delilah spoke her vows, her voice clear and confident, she felt the final pieces of her broken past fall away, replaced by the promise of the life she and Noah would build together. When he slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, a simple gold band with a small pearl at its center, she knew that she had finally, truly come home. The reception that followed was joyous and unpretentious, with tables laden with food contributed by townswomen who had once shunned Delilah's very presence. Children played in the schoolyard despite the winter chill, their laughter a fitting soundtrack to the celebration. Even Frank Hollister offered gruff congratulations, his handshake firm as he welcomed Noah to the ranks of married men. As evening fell and the guests began to depart, Noah took Delilah's hand and led her to a waiting buggy decorated with ribbons and pine branches. "Where are we going?" she asked, laughing as he helped her up. "The house is just over the hill." "Not tonight," Noah replied with a mysterious smile. "I have a surprise for my bride." He drove her past their house and deeper into the property, following the creek, until they reached the hidden valley he had shown her months before. There, nestled among the cottonwoods, stood a small cabin she had never seen before, newly built, with smoke curling invitingly from its chimney. "Noah," she gasped, "when did you do this?" "Daniel and I have been working on it for weeks," he admitted, helping her down from the buggy. "I wanted somewhere private for us to begin our marriage, a place that's just ours, away from the school and the main house." Touched beyond words, Delilah let him carry her across the threshold in the traditional manner. Inside, the cabin was simple but beautifully appointed, with a cheerful fire burning in the stone fireplace, a table set with their wedding dinner, and a large bed covered with her mother's handmade quilt. "Do you like it?" Noah asked, suddenly uncertain in the face of her silence. In answer, Delilah wound her arms around his neck and kissed him with all the love in her heart. "It's perfect," she whispered. "You're perfect." Later, as they lay entwined beneath her mother's quilt, the fire casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the walls, Delilah traced the contours of Noah's face with gentle fingers. "I never thought I could be this happy," she confessed. "After everything that happened, I thought that part of my life was over forever." Noah captured her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "You deserve every happiness, Delilah, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it. We'll build it together," she corrected softly. "The school, our home, our family, everything, our family," Noah repeated, his eyes warming at the thought. "I like the sound of that." In the spring, as wildflowers once again carpeted the valley in swaths of color, the San Pedro school welcomed its first students, 28 children ranging in age from 6 to 16. Delilah, now Mrs. Patterson, taught the older students while her colleague from Santa Fe, Miss Abigail Collins, handled the younger ones. The school quickly became a source of pride for the town, drawing families from surrounding areas who wished to give their children a proper education. By summer, plans were underway to add a third classroom to accommodate the growing enrollment. Noah continued as deputy sheriff, though he spent increasing time helping manage their expanding property. Under his and Delilah's joint stewardship, the Prescott-Patterson land became a model of progressive farming and community involvement. They implemented irrigation techniques Noah had learned during his travels, introduced new crop varieties, and established a cooperative arrangement with smaller landholders to share equipment and labor. When the railroad arrived in the summer of 1877, just as Noah had predicted, the town of San Pedro experienced a surge of growth. The station, built on land donated by Delilah, brought new businesses and settlers, transforming the once isolated community into a thriving market center for the region. Thomas Whitley Sr., hearing of San Pedro's prosperity, made one attempt to return and re-establish his influence. He found, however, that the town had moved beyond its willingness to be dominated by a single powerful individual. The community's recent history had taught it the value of fairness and collective decision-making. Whitley departed again, bitter but powerless. In the autumn of 1878, Delilah gave birth to their first child, a son they named James, after her father. The following year brought a daughter, Elizabeth. As their family grew, so did their vision for the future of San Pedro and its surroundings. 10 years after her return to the town that had once shunned her, Delilah Patterson stood on the porch of their expanded homestead, watching Noah teach young James to ride his first pony. Elizabeth, now 8, sat nearby, reading a book with the serious concentration that reminded Delilah so much of herself at that age. Their youngest child, 4-year-old Thomas, named in a final act of forgiveness toward the young man whose actions had once destroyed her life, played contentedly with wooden blocks at her feet. The school had grown to 5 classrooms with 6 teachers, serving over 100 children from San Pedro and neighboring communities. The cooperative farming initiative she and Noah had established now included 15 families working together to maximize their productivity and profits. And the town itself had become known throughout the region for its progressive attitudes and community spirit. As Noah looked up and waved to her, his smile as warm and loving as ever, Delilah reflected on the strange and winding path that had led her to this moment of contentment. The tragedy that had driven her from San Pedro had seemed, at the time, to be the end of everything she valued. Instead, it had been merely a dark passage on a journey toward a fuller, richer life than she could have imagined. "Mama." Thomas called, holding up his completed tower of blocks for her approval. "Look what I made. It's wonderful, sweetheart," she praised, kneeling beside him. "You've built something beautiful from those simple pieces." Just as she and Noah had done with the broken pieces of her past, she thought. Just as the town of San Pedro had done with its history of prejudice and false judgment. Some structures, once destroyed, could be rebuilt stronger than before if there were hands willing to do the work and hearts brave enough to try again. Noah joined her on the porch, wrapping an arm around her waist as they watched their children play in the golden afternoon light. "Happy?" he asked, a question he still posed regularly, as if to reassure himself that the life they had built together was as fulfilling for her as it was for him. "Completely," she answered truthfully, leaning into his embrace. "The town that once shunned me for my past gave me you, the man who loved me for my future. How could I be anything but happy?" Noah's kiss was as tender as their first, full of the devotion that had transformed both their lives. "To the future, then," he murmured against her lips. "Our future together." "Together," Delilah agreed, her heart full to overflowing with gratitude for the second chance she had been given, not just at love, but at belonging, at purpose, at the kind of deep-rooted happiness she had once thought forever beyond her reach. As the sun set over San Pedro, casting long shadows across the land that was their legacy, Delilah Patterson knew with absolute certainty that she was, at last and forever, home.